Some puzzling new developments tonight in the ongoing search for Nancy Guthrie.
Investigation. Handled. That was the singular word sent from a phone during a quiet April evening, exactly 8 minutes after Nancy's pacemaker logged its final heartbeat and flatlined forever. No message saying something happened, no request to call someone, no confusion or uncertainty, not one syllable of panic or fear or even grief. Just that single word, transmitted in darkness to a burner phone that detectives could not trace. That device was a prepaid phone bought with cash, unregistered to any name, meant to leave zero evidence behind. Handled. That is not a term used following an accident. It is not a word born from shock or panic or the broken psyche of a person who just witnessed a tragedy and is struggling to process the trauma. The text lacks emotion or warmth. It shows no sign of a human reaction to an unexpected event. It is the language of a task completed or a job finished. It implies a problem was solved, a task was finished, and something that required removal was gone. Someone waiting on the other end for that specific confirmation. For the recipient, the wait was finally over. You are watching True Crime Hex. Subscribe and hit the bell to track every update. We move with clinical precision, refusing to stop until every forensic detail is exposed. Let us begin. Nancy Guthrie was not a person who just vanished. That sounds like a strange observation, but those who knew her understand the weight of it. Nancy was a creature of habit. She woke at the same hour daily, drank the same coffee, and called family on a fixed schedule. She was the core of her family, the gravity that held her entire world firmly in place. Her family revolved around her presence. She was consistent and reliable, until the sudden moment she vanished. Savannah, her daughter, later described an inexplicable sensation that took hold of her that night. It was not immediate panic, it was something much quieter and more heavy. That instinctual alarm you feel when you enter a room and realize something is deeply, fundamentally wrong, even if you cannot pinpoint the cause. Surfaces look normal, but the internal dread remains totally constant. Savannah carried that dread when her mother failed to answer her phone calls that evening. A disaster was unfolding. She lacked the details, but she knew. The focal point of this investigation is Tomaso, the son-in-law of the victim. He had been a member of the family for several years. He knew the layout of the house and every detail of Nancy's daily routine. He understood her schedule better than almost anyone else in her life. Close associates called him controlled. He was not exactly cold, but he was calculating. He was the type to measure words. He always appeared to have a clear objective and a specific plan to achieve it. During the weeks before that April night, the atmosphere in the household began to shift significantly. Nancy had initiated legal updates and financial restructuring. These were specific changes regarding asset control and inheritance access. Detectives would later scrutinize these specific movements very carefully. It is not unusual for a person to update a will or their legal documents. It happens often, but the timing of these edits was suspicious. The specific intent was suspicious. Most importantly, the reaction to the news was suspicious. Tomaso had become increasingly quiet and withdrawn. He was focused in a way that deviated from his typical careful behavior. Family members noticed the change, though they could not find the right words for what they were seeing. He was different. A shift had occurred deep within his personality. It was a transformation that lacked a name then, but would become very clear later on. Now, the timeline of that night begins. Nancy Guthrie lived with a pacemaker. This is a crucial forensic detail in this case, so we must explain exactly how the technology functions. A pacemaker is, surgeons implant this compact medical device deep inside a patient's chest cavity to maintain a steady heart rate. The unit delivers precise electrical pulses directly to the cardiac muscle, ensuring the rhythm remains perfectly stable. Yet this tech performs a secondary function, a forensic detail Nancy's attacker either completely overlooked or failed to consider. It logs a forensic, time-stamped archive of every cardiac contraction, documenting every second of the victim's life. Every spike in heart rate or sign of physiological trauma is captured because pacemakers are incapable of deception. The hardware never forgets, logging every single second of physical trauma the human heart endures. Once detectives extracted the digital logs, the findings were staggering. The timeline shifted at 8:42 p.m. Nancy's cardiac rhythm suddenly spiked as the digital sensors detected unmistakable signs of extreme physiological agony. This was no ordinary exertion from climbing stairs or a quick jump scare caused by a loud bang. These readings were far more severe, matching the specific telemetry medical experts linked to pure, primal terror. Her body was under catastrophic pressure, fighting a desperate, losing battle to maintain basic biological survival. By 8:47 p.m., the telemetry changed once more as motion sensors registered highly irregular movement patterns. The internal accelerometer suggested the body was being handled rather than moving through its own muscular power. External force took over as her body was either carried, forcibly held, or dragged. The medical device documented the entire struggle with clinical precision, capturing every agonizing second without interruption. At 8:52 p.m., the internal log registered a catastrophic and life-threatening cardiac failure. By 9:03 p.m., the heartbeat signal flatlined a mere 21 minutes after the initial trauma. Total silence followed after just 21 minutes, providing a narrow window for forensic investigators to analyze. Within that 21-minute time frame, the fatal events unfolded, yet no one attempted to contact emergency services. No ambulances arrived, no neighbors heard screams, and 0 calls were placed to 911. Outside, the street was calm as the neighborhood continued its normal evening activities. Inside the house, the pacemaker logged the final moments of a life before falling completely silent. This cardiac data raised one simple, devastating question that changed the entire direction of the case. Why was no help summoned if Nancy had suffered a legitimate medical emergency or some tragic household accident? Even in a state of pure panic, the standard human instinct is to immediately reach for a telephone. People naturally scramble for help when they witness a loved one suddenly collapse right before their eyes. Witnesses scream, they bolt outside, or they frantically pound on a neighbor's door demanding immediate medical assistance. They take desperate, visible action because the individual losing their life is someone they supposedly care about deeply. Every biological instinct should drive a person toward life-saving action, fighting to save the victim at all costs. Nothing happened. Instead, there was only a calculated and sustained silence. In homicide investigations, silence following a death is never neutral. It is far more than just a lack of noise. Silence represents a conscious choice, a decision made during those critical minutes after a human heart stops beating. That choice reveals everything about the survivor's true character. Later that night, Savannah finally managed to contact Tomaso. He remained eerily composed, and she would later emphasize the unsettling calmness and steady tone of his voice. He reassured her, claiming everything was perfectly fine and that Nancy was simply resting in the other room. Savannah pressed for details, but his clipped, brief answers were carefully designed to reveal absolutely no incriminating information. He never invited her over or suggested she come see the situation for herself to verify her mother's well-being. He avoided saying your mother is right here, keeping the exchange brief before abruptly ending the connection. Savannah stayed awake all night, but by morning, Nancy had vanished. This was not a voluntary disappearance by choice. She had not packed her bags to start over or made a conscious decision to walk away from her life. She was gone, yet the family home remained exactly as it was the day she vanished. Dishes sat in the drying rack, shoes remained by the door, and her reading glasses rested on the nightstand. Her book lay open to a page she would never finish. Everything remained in its proper place except her. Her disappearance defied all logic, feeling like a deliberate, final, and incredibly dark conclusion to her personal story. It felt wrong. When Savannah finally called the police, a major investigation began. Upon entering the residence, investigators realized the most striking evidence wasn't what they found, but rather what was conspicuously absent. No splintered door frames or shattered glass marked the scene, and every lock remained intact, showing zero signs of forced entry. On the night of April 14th, whoever entered that home didn't need to break in because they already had a way inside. Access was already granted, meaning the intruder possessed a key, knew the security code, or was simply expected to be there. Detectives then scrutinized the interior environment, finding a residence that felt unnervingly controlled and perfectly staged. It wasn't a clumsy or obvious attempt at deception, as nothing had been rearranged or scrubbed down to signal an amateur cover-up. The manipulation was much subtler, revealing a space where every detail felt cold, calculated, and entirely deliberate. Someone had clearly spent time visualizing exactly how the crime scene would appear to the forensic teams tasked with examining it. This level of tactical foresight never happens when a person is reacting in a blind panic. It is the logic of a calm mind methodically working through the steps of a pre-established plan. Minor disturbances were visible, including a chair moved just inches from its original indentations left in the deep carpet fibers. A single rug edge was turned up, creating a small disruption that broke the otherwise rigid order of the entire room. A faint scuff mark marred the hallway baseboard, and while these details seemed minor, they couldn't be dismissed as mere accidents. Combined, they suggested a specific narrative of movement, indicating that more than one person had been occupying that private space. Someone tried to minimize the evidence of their activity, yet they failed to eliminate these forensic traces entirely. Turning to the garage, investigators noted its specific orientation to the street, a tactical detail they recognized as significant. From the sidewalk or a passing vehicle, any car parked within that space would remain completely invisible to every neighboring window. If a body or cargo were loaded into a vehicle there, the line of sight ensured no one outside would see. This architectural angle wasn't accidental, and anyone familiar with the property would have known exactly how to exploit that blind spot. On April 14th, that garage was used specifically because its location provided the perfect cover for whatever took place. The third discovery escalated the situation, transforming a troubling disappearance into a far more serious and high-stakes criminal investigation. Property security cameras failed to capture any footage during the critical hours immediately surrounding the disappearance of Nancy Guthrie. When technicians analyzed the failure, they found no evidence of an external cyber attack or any physical breach of the system. There was no hacking involved because the cameras had been manually placed into maintenance mode, effectively blinding the entire security network. This specific internal setting is designed to temporarily disable all recording functions across the entire property. Maintenance mode never activates on its own, and it cannot be triggered by a sudden power surge or a random glitch. It demands valid login credentials from someone who understands the software and possesses full access to the administrative account. A conscious decision was made to deactivate the system before the events of that night ever got underway. This revelation changed the entire trajectory of the case, as previous theories of a tragic accident were suddenly proven impossible. Investigators had considered a scenario where something went wrong and a person simply reacted poorly out of sheer fear or confusion. It was a theory without malice, suggesting only human failure and a terrible choice made in a moment of crisis. The deactivated cameras killed that theory because nobody turns off their security system while they are in a state of panic. You don't log into a digital interface and initiate maintenance mode if you are feeling scared and completely overwhelmed. You do that beforehand, you do that while you are still preparing. You take that step when you know an event is coming and you refuse to let it be captured on video. After the first full day of processing the scene, the focus shifted away from the simple disappearance of Nancy Guthrie. The real questions were, now who had orchestrated this and how long they had been planning the logistics. Detectives needed to know where she was taken after that night ended. Then they found it, one single word. A single word was transmitted from the phone of Tomaso at 9:11 p.m. on the night of April 14th. This occurred 8 minutes after Nancy's pacemaker stopped forever. The word was handled. Detectives analyzed that text for hours, focusing intently on the precise timing and the cold efficiency of the message. They scrutinized the clinical language and cross-referenced every single byte of the associated metadata. They realized then that this was a highly calculated execution rather than a spontaneous act of sudden violence. The search for Nancy Guthrie was now officially a homicide investigation. For a long duration, they focused on the timeline, the cold phrasing, and the digital evidence. Detectives analyzed the recipient list. Every detail contained in that short transmission triggered an immediate, visceral reaction from the investigators. Handled is not the vocabulary choice of a person reeling from a loved one having a life-threatening medical crisis. You do not reach for such clinical language when you are terrified, disoriented, and praying for a positive outcome. That single word lacks any trace of raw emotion or crushing grief. It betrays no shock from someone who just witnessed a tragedy and is struggling to wrap their mind around the horror. Handled is what you say when a chore is done or when a specific problem has been officially dealt with. It signifies that a necessary objective has been met. You are simply notifying another party that the job is finished and taken care of. It tells them the wait is over. Crucially, the message went to a number that local police could not identify right away. The line belonged to a prepaid burner phone, the sort of hardware bought with untraceable cash at a gas station or shop. You buy these at corner stores when you specifically want to avoid having your legal name linked to a mobile number. These devices are utilized when critical communication must occur without being logged or documented by standard telecommunications service providers. This hardware exists because someone planned ahead, ensuring their most sensitive or incriminating conversations could never be tracked back to them. Investigators never found that physical burner phone. It remained hidden, likely destroyed or discarded. However, its presence on the network record fundamentally changed the entire trajectory of this criminal investigation. Tomasso was not operating solo. There was a second actor out there, another individual who was standing by for instructions. They were waiting for one exact word, at a precise time, from a specific source, and then they swung into action. This accomplice likely moved to execute their prearranged role, fully understanding what handled meant within this dark and narrow context. This was someone involved well before the clock started that night. The case had transformed into a much larger, coordinated operation. This conspiracy was far more sophisticated than first believed. Detectives responded by seizing every available scrap of digital forensic data. They pulled cell records spanning weeks and analyzed location history from every device registered to the local household Wi-Fi network. They scrubbed movement history from various mobile applications that automatically log a user's precise geographic position. This background tracking runs silently on almost every smartphone, often without the user ever realizing their movements are being archived. They gathered vehicle GPS coordinates and cellular tower pings, which catalog exactly which towers a phone hits during its transit. Every data point was subpoenaed and meticulously analyzed. Experts then laid it all out on a strictly chronological forensic timeline. Forensic teams built this timeline over several grueling days of work. What surfaced from that raw data was a digital trail. It was not a perfect path. The person behind this plan had taken certain precautions to avoid detection. Yet, being careful is not the same as being invisible. Carrying a smartphone means leaving permanent breadcrumbs across the modern digital landscape. You leave marks whether intended or not. Every tower your phone hits records that specific digital handshake. Each background app creates a log of your position. These digital fingerprints are nearly impossible to fully erase. Every web search and mapped route creates a data packet. That information lives on a server, waiting for law enforcement to find. That data is permanent. It sits there, just waiting for an investigator with a warrant to come knocking. Records indicate the movement began shortly after 9 o'clock on the evening of April 14th. A device linked to that house started moving. This travel was definitely not aimless or random. This was not the wandering path of a driver without a destination. This movement showed clear intent and direction from the start. The driver followed a precise route. They exited the residential suburbs located on the far outskirts of the city. The signal moved through commercial zones before merging onto a highway. It headed away from civilization and deep into the desert. The desert. We must pause here. It is critical to understand why that destination matters so much. That destination reveals the true nature of the crime. The desert surrounding that region is an unforgiving and vast wilderness. It is remote in a way no suburb could ever be. There are stretches where you can drive for miles without seeing lights. You can travel for 20 minutes and never see another car, building, or even a single street lamp. The terrain shifts between hard-packed earth and loose sand. This vast landscape just swallows things whole. Items buried far from established trails or roads can stay hidden for years. There is simply no reason for anyone to dig there. Sometimes they stay hidden forever. The desert is, practically speaking, a place where evidence just stops existing. It is the ultimate dumping ground. You take things there when you need them to stay lost to the world forever. The driver on April 14th knew that. The movement data showed the device tracking deep into that void. The car stopped at precise coordinates, locations investigators meticulously logged and flagged for immediate search. The tracker stayed at that spot for a prolonged period. This was no quick errand. It sat long enough for manual labor. Then it crawled forward, pushing deeper into the desert. Eventually, the signal turned toward the city. 2 stops, 2 specific sites, logged and flagged. Both sites sat waiting. Detectives drove to the first coordinate, arriving with specialized excavation gear. They deployed forensic teams specializing in ground search and evidence recovery operations. They approached the site with clinical precision, moving the way professionals do when a location holds weight. You simply cannot afford to disturb the scene before every inch has been properly documented. Their findings confirmed the grim theory. Fresh tire tracks remained pressed deep into the dry earth. The tread depth indicated a significant load, something far heavier than just the weight of a car. This was the weight of cargo. The tracks revealed a vehicle that had backed carefully into the area. He didn't pull in forward. Backing in is a tactical move for someone planning to unload heavy cargo. You do that to minimize the distance to the ground. Clean entry. Clean, decisive exit. There was zero evidence of hesitation in the wheel pattern. This was someone who knew exactly what they were doing. Every detail had been calculated in advance. Only a small patch of ground had been recently disturbed. Not obviously. From a distance, the site looked like ordinary, undisturbed desert terrain. But up close, under forensic lighting and trained eyes, the signs of tampering were unmistakable. The soil had been shifted and compacted in spots where desert floor naturally sits loose. It was loose where it should have been firm. This was a disturbance that required physical effort. No amount of effort can make that damage disappear entirely, because the earth remembers pressure. Soil holds the impression of what has been done to it much longer than people realize. Forensic teams started sweeping the area. The first piece of physical evidence was a scrap of fabric. It was buried shallow, a partial scrap, torn rather than cut, matching the description of the clothing. Nancy was wearing it the night she vanished. It wasn't the whole garment, just a single piece. That scrap was tangible. It was physical proof that connected this specific desert location to her. Miles from her house, linked to Nancy Guthrie specifically. It placed her there. Or at least, something from her body was there hours after her pacemaker went silent. The second discovery truly rocked the investigation. They found a piece of the pacemaker casing. This was the outer housing for the medical device implanted inside Nancy's chest. The same unit whose data provided the timeline and that critical 21-minute window. Evidence of distress, erratic movement, and her cardiac event was partially recovered from the site. It wasn't the entire device, but enough remained for identification, enough to confirm its origin, and where it came from. Someone had physically removed it. That is a massive realization. Removing an internal pacemaker is never accidental. It isn't a mistake made in a moment of panic. It isn't done by someone who is confused. It requires a deliberate physical action. It requires tools. It takes time and a level of composure that ignores fear entirely. Grief and confusion were absent. There was a reason. Detectives understood that motive immediately. The subject knew what the pacemaker held. They realized the device had been recording. Every second of those 21 minutes was logged. The distress, the movement, the final event, the silence. If that device were ever found and analyzed, it would tell the truth. A truth that could not be argued or explained away. So, a choice was made. The pacemaker had to go. It had to leave that house along with Nancy Guthrie, be moved to a location where it would never surface, buried far away from civilization, a place where no one would look. But it hadn't been taken far enough. Either something went wrong at the first sight, or time simply ran short. The casing sat in the dirt, partially exposed when investigators arrived. With forensic teams packed their gear as the focus shifted back to the station, where Tomasso's interrogation intensified. Detectives laid the forensic evidence directly on the table, starting with the cold digital pacemaker records. They detailed the 21-minute timeline and that single message, while GPS movement data tracked his exact desert route. Every coordinate, tire, track, and scrap of fabric was presented, ending with the spent shell casing recovered from the sand. They presented the facts with clinical precision, watching his reaction before finally demanding he explain the undeniable inconsistencies. His opening response carried the hollow, vague quality typical of a story that had been over-rehearsed. It was loose enough to mimic confusion, yet possessed a structure that signaled careful, defensive preparation. He claimed he was gripped by panic and simply did not know how to react when Nancy suddenly collapsed. He argued that shock clouded his judgment, and by the time his mind cleared, he feared the optics of her death. He blamed fear for his disastrous choices, but after letting him finish, investigators pivoted directly to the outgoing message. Tomaso fell silent for the first time, his composure wavering as they questioned him about the prepaid cell phone. They focused on the recipient's number and the specific device that had logged that one-word text handled. That text was sent 8 minutes after her pacemaker flatlined, yet he claimed he had no idea. When they revealed the call logs, he shifted uncomfortably and his story morphed. He admitted he contacted someone. He claimed he was desperate for assistance and insisted he didn't know who else to turn to in that chaotic moment. When they pressed for details on the type of assistance requested, he let a long, heavy silence fill the room. He eventually stated he needed help with management, a word that hung in the air with a heavy, clinical finality. Management. He didn't ask for medical transport or help calling 911. He sought control, not rescue. His request bore no resemblance to the frantic actions of a man blindsided by a sudden, horrific tragedy. Management implied total control. It meant a situation was being handled according to a specific, pre-existing plan. This wasn't a reaction to chaos, but a suggestion that Nancy's death was followed by calculated moves, not panicked errors. It pointed toward a coordinated response involving at least one other person. The data showed a specific route, 2 distinct desert stops, and the purposeful extraction of a vital medical device. Finally, that one-word confirmation text signaled that everything had proceeded exactly as they had planned. His narrative fractured multiple times during the questioning, as his self-reported timestamps failed to match the hard digital forensics. His excuses for the timeline gaps dissolved instantly when detectives produced physical evidence that directly refuted his claims. He was an intelligent man, which made these logical failures far more damning than if they were simple lapses in memory. Normally, a smart person telling the truth modifies their story to align with the reality of new, factual information. They want to clarify the truth. However, an intelligent subject managing a lie behaves very differently. They reshape their story only to find a new version that avoids the traps of the proven evidence. By navigating around the facts, Tomaso fundamentally shifted the entire trajectory of the homicide investigation. The shift was total. This was no longer a question of whether something deliberate occurred. Forensic data had already spoken. Now, the focus turned towards securing absolute accountability. Every calculated choice, every co-conspirator, and every remote location that still guarded its secrets would be thoroughly scrutinized. The desert had more to say, and investigators were fully intended to listen. The arid landscape doesn't surrender secrets easily, a reality these investigators understood before starting. Having handled cases in remote terrain, they knew these vast open spaces are experts at absorbing and burying evidence. It swallows tracks and erases footprints, turning the recovery process into an exhausting search for the hidden. Some things aren't meant to be found, but experience had taught these detectives a very different lesson. After years on the force, you learn the truth. The desert is patient, and so are the searchers. Once the initial site was cleared, the team pivoted their focus back to the incriminating GPS movement data. The digital trail continued past the first scene, showing that the device remained in motion after that initial stop. He pushed deeper into the wilderness, moving far away from the highway and any marked road on a map. They were heading into an area requiring precise navigation, not a place someone just stumbles upon. It was a location that required prior knowledge or a specific advanced scouting mission. The drive to Site 2 abandoned the pavement completely, hitting packed dirt before transitioning into raw, broken terrain. It was barely a path, just crushed earth where heavy vehicles once passed. Not recent, and certainly not frequent, yet enough to leave faint scars on the landscape. This specific route never shows up on any GPS map. Someone found this by scouting it out ahead of time. Once they reached those second coordinates, they killed the engine and began surveying the area. From the surface, it mirrored every other bleak stretch of desert they had already crossed that morning. Some zones were flat, while others were broken by jagged rock formations. Arid brush clung to the ground that had not seen rain in many months. There was absolutely nothing here to make a casual driver slow down or stare twice. But lead investigators do not see things the way ordinary people do. They view the ground differently. They analyze how soil sits, how it compacts, and how it retains moisture at various depths. They scan for scrub brush that was moved and regrown off-center. They inspect rocks that were shifted and replaced in defiance of natural physics. Forces like gravity and time leave specific signatures. They search for traces of human intervention instead. In a landscape that should look untouched, those calculated human traces were clearly present. Site 2 showed ground disturbance much more extensive than the first location. It covered a wider perimeter and ran deeper, requiring significant manual labor. This required more brute force than the first stop. The soil profile revealed distinct separation. Someone dug down to a significant depth before carefully backfilling the hole with loose, separated earth. They raked or smoothed the surface afterward to hide the contrast between the disturbed soil. Someone worked incredibly hard here. Despite using ground-penetrating radar, cadaver dogs, and forensic teams scouring every inch. Even with grids covering the entire flagged area, Nancy herself was never located. She was simply not there, or perhaps the search had not yet pinpointed her location. That distinction is critical. The absence of a body never proves that the body is missing. It does not mean the search failed. This remote desert terrain is brutal. Covering every inch is impossible. Evidence buried deep in packed earth stays hidden. Standard search methods do not always yield results on the first attempt. Investigators know this fact. They do not just walk away from a potential site. They do not quit just because the initial sweep failed to produce a recovery. The second site stayed active, flagged for more work with advanced equipment. This specific case file remained open. It was simply waiting. It is how cases wait when the evidence confirms a presence, but recovery lags behind. Back in the city, the legal machinery started turning as prosecutors reviewed everything. They analyzed the pacemaker data and that 21-minute timeline. They checked the handheld message timestamps, the desert GPS trail, and every item recovered. They dissected the interrogation transcript with its changing stories and one revealing word. That specific word sat in the middle of the record like a heavy anchor that cannot be retracted. The legal hurdle here is massive. Without a recovered body, the challenge is unique. Prosecutors cannot rely on a confirmed cause of death to build their foundation. They cannot stand before a jury and cite a medical examiner's report on how she died. They cannot link a physical injury to the defendant. That traditional pillar is gone. This void gives defense attorneys room to argue that without a body, certainty is impossible. Skilled prosecutors fully understand that line of defense. They also know how to fight it. The law does not require a body. Under the law, prosecutors must present evidence that establishes beyond a reasonable doubt a crime took place. They must also prove the defendant is the one responsible. Here, the evidence gathered without a body was remarkably consistent and detailed. That pacemaker data alone provided the rare kind of forensic log that investigators dream of. It was objective, precise, and exactly the type of record a detective might wait a career to find. Tamper-proof and clinical, it told a story that synchronized perfectly with every other piece of recovered evidence from the residence, the desert, and the digital footprint left by specific devices active during the late night of April 14th. Prosecutors focused their attention elsewhere, though. It was not just the event, but the calculated actions that followed. Every decision made between 9:03 p.m. and the moment police entered that house represented a documented chain of deliberate tactical choices. First, they disabled the security system. Then, minutes after the pacemaker went silent, a message went out to an accomplice. Next, they loaded something into a vehicle in a garage, positioned to stay out of public view. This blocked all visibility from the street. They then drove a route requiring advanced local knowledge to navigate successfully. They stopped at two distinct locations deep within the desert terrain. A medical device was extracted from a body and buried. Then, returning to the city, they answered a call from a panicked daughter, using a calm voice and brief sentences to ensure nothing was revealed. Every single movement was a choice. Choices made immediately after a death, especially those executed with high speed and total coordination with an accomplice, speak directly to the question of criminal intent and premeditated cover-up. These actions don't show confusion. They demonstrate cold, hard clarity. This wasn't panic, it was planning. This wasn't someone overwhelmed by tragedy, but an individual following a script. They were executing a response that had been fully calculated before the victim's heart even stopped. Simultaneously, identifying that second individual became the most aggressively pursued lead in the entire homicide investigation. Publicly, detectives only named Tomasso. Yet, the work to identify the person behind that text message remained constant. Investigators were working tirelessly to track the person on the receiving end of that specific digital message. That search began the first week. While the burner phone remained missing, it was far from untraceable. Burner phones aren't actually invisible. Once a prepaid device is activated and hits the network, it leaves a trail. Every received message and every connection is logged deep within the architecture of the cellular provider's system. As that device moves between locations, it pings towers. Those pings create a permanent time-stamped record of movement. Police have been meticulously following that digital thread to see exactly where that second phone traveled. They knew the identity, the history with Tomaso, and exactly how long this relationship had been active. Details regarding their agreement and the timeline of their coordination were facts the investigation held but kept tightly guarded. They held those details back. The timing of such a release is always strategic. In multi-suspect cases, the sequence in which information goes public can make or break the entire prosecution. Releasing facts too early allows suspects to coordinate their stories. Precision and patience are vital investigative tools here. Early disclosure invites collusion. In this game, patience is a tactical weapon for the police. Savannah refused to wait, though. She was restless, but she was also incredibly smart about her approach. She knew her media presence served a tactical purpose. While her grief was undeniable, she used it as leverage. She didn't hide her pain. Every interview and social media post was a calculated move to keep eyes on. In the case, by speaking her mother's name publicly, she ensured that someone with key information might finally come forward. Missing persons cases live or die based on tips. Often, one small detail breaks everything wide open. It depends on the witness who saw something strange but hesitated to report it to the authorities back then. It relies on the neighbor who dismissed a suspicious detail as trivial or the acquaintance asked to do a favor. Maybe they stayed quiet for weeks until their conscience finally forced them to pick up the phone and call. Savannah wouldn't let them forget. She was the constant reminder that a family was waiting for that specific call. She targeted Tomaso with a level of public intensity that few family members ever dare to show during an investigation. She abandoned careful language and legal caution. Savannah was blunt, direct, and completely unafraid of the fallout. She didn't hedge. She called him a liar and stated clearly that he was exactly who the detectives suspected. The target of the investigation was no stranger. He was the same man she had observed manipulating her family for years. He was calculated and clinical, constantly controlling the room while staying aware of his specific objectives. He dictated how things appeared to outsiders, so when she heard the word handled, it didn't come as a shock. That was the most haunting detail in her testimony, not that the term surprised her or felt out of place, but that it fit perfectly with the cold, methodical personality of the man she had lived with for years. When detectives revealed exactly what message was sent and the timing of it, something deep inside her clicked instantly. She recognized his voice in that text, the cold jargon of a man who viewed human problems as mere logistics. Issues were to be solved, not felt, and now a cash reward is offered for information regarding Nancy's whereabouts. The FBI tip line remains active, and authorities want to speak with anyone contacted around the time she vanished. If someone asked you for a suspicious favor, investigators need to hear from you. This includes anyone offered a trade for a favor or those who witnessed something that has been weighing on them. Do not dismiss any detail that feels wrong in your gut. Your information does not need to be a complete story. Leads do not have to be polished or perfect. Even a single, isolated detail might be the key they need. One minor fact can bridge the gap in this investigation and finally blow the entire case wide open. The forensic evidence is clear. Nancy Guthrie's pacemaker logged 21 minutes of biometric data on the night of April 14th, showing escalating physical trauma and erratic motion, followed by a cardiac event and silence. Throughout those 21 minutes of distress, no emergency call was ever placed from inside that home or the surrounding area. Exactly 8 minutes after her heart stopped, a single word was sent to a burner phone from a nearby location. GPS data shows a vehicle taking a precise route into the desert, stopping at 2 distinct points. Forensic teams recovered evidence linked to Nancy at the first location, where they discovered her pacemaker had been discarded. The device was buried, and the alarm was disabled from within using authorized credentials. This happened before the struggle started, and the only person present has provided a statement that is deeply flawed. His story changes constantly and conflicts with the forensic data, specifically his use of the word management, which is revealing. That word speaks volumes. Still, critical questions remain like where Nancy is and what sits at that second desert site. Police are still searching for the contents of that second location and the identity of the unidentified second person. We don't know the depth of their involvement or the events leading up to 8:42 p.m. that night. The crucial time before the pacemaker registered trauma remains a mystery. The moments when the initial plan was set in motion. That was the catalyst for the entire tragedy. Nancy Guthrie was more than a victim, she was a devoted mother. She was a grandmother who loved her morning routine and consistent phone calls, a woman who lived her life with purpose. Routine was her world, and she was the anchor for a family that has been drowning in grief ever since. Nancy deserved more than this violent end, and she certainly deserves to be brought home from wherever she is right now. The search in Savannah continues, and investigators are still pursuing every active lead. Somewhere in that vast desert, the evidence is waiting for someone with the resolve and courage to finally uncover it. If you are new to True Crime Hacks, please subscribe. We bring this level of intense forensic detail to every story. We are committed to uncovering the facts and providing a voice for victims who deserve to be found and brought home. Please share this video. The more people who see these details, the higher the chance that someone remembers a key fact. Every detail matters in this investigation. We will see you on the next case.